Hello everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Beatrice. If this is your first time seeing my face on my YouTube channel, thank you so much for stopping by. To my returning subscribers, thank you so much for being a huge support to my YouTube channel. And I also want to take this time and apologize for being away from this space for too long. I've actually been very busy, but I'm right back here with you guys. So in this video, I'll be sharing with you guys how I made this beautiful princess darts Mandarin collar dress with side lacing. So in this video, I'll be sharing with you guys how I drafted, how I cut, and the sewing process of this dress all in one video. So if you're interested in watching this, please keep on watching to the end. Please don't just watch and leave. Hit the like and subscribe button, leave a comment below, and turn on your notification bell each time I post any video. Let's get right started. For this project, I use this beautiful coffee brown crepe fabric, which is 2 yards, and I have my white air stay that I'm going to be gumming to the fabric. I have my drafting materials, my tape, my ruler, my scissors, my pencil, and my marker, and I have my curve rule with my pattern paper. Let's get started. On my pattern paper, I already marked out my vertical lines, but I'll be showing you guys how I did that. From the top of my pattern paper, I placed my tape and then I marked my shoulder to my bust point, which is 10, shoulder to my underbust, which is 13, shoulder to my waist, which is 16. From the waistline, I came down by 9.5 inches as my hip line. For the full dress length, I will illustrate later in the video. My shoulder to shoulder measurement is 15.5, so I divided that into two, and then from the midpoint of that pattern paper I marked it across like so, and then I also came down on this point. I marked the same thing. For my neck width, I marked 2.6 inches. Then from the point where I marked my shoulder measurement divided by 2, I came down by 1 inch, and then I used my straight ruler to connect a slant to the neck width. From the shoulder slope, I marked my armhole measurement divided by 2, which is 8 inches. So I marked it there. Then I took my tape to the original top of the shoulder. I measured what I have there. So I went, whatever I had there, I went ahead to mark the lines across downward like so. To get the midpoint of my armhole, I'm going to divide these 2 points into two, and then I marked the midpoint. So I went inward by half of an inch around that midpoint. Then I used my straight ruler to connect a slant line from that shoulder line to that half inch I went in by. On my armhole or chest line, I marked a quarter of my bust round measurement. Then I used my curve ruler to connect from the midpoint to that bust round measurement. From the center fold of my pattern paper on my bust line, I marked my nipple to nipple measurement divided by 2. I did the same on my underbust, my waistline, down to my hip line. Then I used my straight ruler to connect the lines as shown. On the remaining parts of my shoulder, I got what I have there, and then I divided it into two, and then I marked the midpoints of that area. Then I used my straight ruler to connect a slant line to the bust line. To tighten my shoulder, from that center line I drew all the way to the bust, I'm going to go outward from the center line by a quarter of an inch on both sides. Then I'll use my straight ruler to connect the lines to the bust line as shown. I used my scissors to cut the dart legs on the shoulder all the way to the bust line. I didn't exceed that point. After slashing the dart legs, I used my masking tape to tape this down by bringing the paper closely together. I didn't overlap this, so I went ahead to tape it all the way to the top as shown. After taping it down, I noticed that the shoulder was not aligning. I used my straight ruler to connect a slant line to the neck width as shown. To tighten my underbust, from the nipple to nipple line, I marked quarter of an inch towards the center front and 1.5 inches towards the side front. So this is my tightening. I used my curve roller to connect it to that 1 inch I came down from the bust line, like so, on both sides. I went upward from the bust line by 1 inch and I marked it there. Then I went back to the armhole. Got the midpoint of the armhole and then I marked it there. Then I used my curve ruler to connect from the midpoint of my armhole to that point. From the midpoint of my armhole, from where I drew the middle line, I went outward by 1/4 inch on both sides. So from this point, I'm going to measure what I have there, and I have 0.6 inches. I went ahead to connect it outwards like so. From one of the dart legs at the armhole, I used my curve ruler to connect to the 1 inch we went upward from the bust line like so. I also did the same thing on the other dart leg. I also extended the nipple to nipple line all the way to the hip line as shown. I went ahead to mark out the same 1/4 inch that I marked from the underbust line towards the center front all the way to the hip line as shown. Towards the side front of the dress, I also measured 1.6 inches that I measured from the underbust on the waistline and also the hip line as shown. Then I went ahead to use my straight ruler to connect the lines on both sides. To get the length of the dress, I initially wanted this dress to be 41 inches, but this paper stopped at 36. So I'm going to add another paper downward to complete the measurement, and I'll also extend the nipple to nipple line. I went ahead to add extra paper at the base of the pattern paper since it wasn't complete, and I have 41 inches length. I also extended the dart line all the way to the dress length. That's 1/4 inch on the center front and 1.6 towards the sides as shown. On my chest line, I marked the quarter of my bust round measurement as shown. On my waistline, I marked the quarter of my waist round measurement, and then I also measured whatever I had between those darts and I replaced it back on this side as shown. On my hip line, I marked the quarter of my hip round measurement and then I also replaced my dart. Then I used my straight ruler to connect the point from the chest line to the waistline and also from the waistline to the hip line. I measured whatsoever I have on the hip line with the dart replaced. I extended it to the dress length and then I marked the same thing. So because I don't want this dress to be pencil, I won't be subtracting 1 inch or 1.5. I want it to be wide at the bottom. So I connected the mark lines to the hip line as shown. I used my curve ruler to connect the points from the extended part outward of the armhole to the chest line like so. For the keyhole neckline, I measured 4 inches downward just after the initial front neckline and then I marked it there. From the 4 inches I came down from the initial front neckline, I got the midpoint in between that area and I marked it. So from that midpoint, I went inward by 0.2 inches and I used my curve ruler to connect a line to the initial neckline as shown, and also from the midpoint to the 4 inches I came down from the initial neckline. Now, if you notice on the style inspiration, the keyhole went from the neckline all the way to the underbust, but I wanted to keep my moderate, so if you want yours to be that way, you extend the keyhole to the underbust. I went ahead to cut out the front parts on the sides as shown. So guys, when I was cutting this, I forgot to input my bust dart. So the difference between my front waistline and my back waistline is 1.5 inches. From my bust line, I came down by 1.5 inches, and then I used my straight ruler to connect to the bust point. On my bust line, I folded that line towards the bust line that downward as shown. Then I used my masking tape to tape it down. I'm done cutting the front pieces. This is the side front and this is the center front. I'll set this aside and work on the back pattern. On my pattern paper for the back pattern, I already marked out my vertical measurement. Just like we did for the front, I measured from my shoulder line to my bust line and then my shoulder to my waistline for the back. And then from that waistline, I came down by 9.5 inches for my hip line. I didn't extend this pattern paper all the way to the down part. I'll do that on my fabric because I don't want to start joining paper all the way again. So that's just what I did here. I divided my shoulder measurement into two and I marked it here and also at the top, just like I did for the front. And then my neck width is 2.6 inches, the same way I marked at the front, but my neck depth is 1.7 inches and I connected the line. On my shoulder line, I came down by 1 inch for my shoulder slope. I used my straight ruler to connect from the shoulder slope to the neck width. Then I divided my armhole round by 2 and I marked it, which is 8 inches. And then I got the midpoint. From the midpoint, I went inward by 0.5 inches. Then I used my straight ruler to connect from the shoulder line to this point as shown. Then on my chest line, or my armhole line, I divided my bust round measurement by 4 and I marked it there. Then I used my curve ruler from the midpoint of my armhole. I connected the point. From the center part of my pattern paper, I marked my nipple to nipple line divided by 2 on my chest line, my bust line, my waistline, and also on my hip line. And then I connected the lines. So for this back pattern, there won't be any princess darts. I just did a basic dart. From my nipple to nipple line, I went outward by half of an inch on both sides. Then I connected all the way to the chest line. On the waistline, I came down by 5 inches on that nipple to nipple line. I marked it and then I connected the dart leg to that point as shown. Just the same way I did shoulder tightening for the front, I'll do the same thing at the back so the shoulders can align. So I just got the midpoint of the remaining part of my shoulder. I connected the slant line all the way to that nipple to nipple line on the chest line. And then I came out by 1/4 inch on both sides and connected the dart to that chest line. I went ahead to use my scissors to cut the dart legs on both sides and I stopped at the chest line. I didn't exceed that chest line so I can be able to close it properly. Just like I did for the front, I'll use my masking tape to tape this together, but I'll do that off camera. On my waistline, I went ahead to mark out 1/4 of my waist round measurement as shown, and then I also measured whatsoever I had between those darts and I replaced it, but I replaced only one of those darts because I want to cinch my waist a little. Then I went ahead to connect from the chest line to the waistline. On my hip line, I marked 1/4 of my hip round measurement and then I used my straight ruler to connect from the hip to the waistline. I went ahead to tape the slash shoulder together off camera, like I mentioned earlier. To get rid of zipper bulge, on the waistline, I went inward by half of an inch as shown, and then I came downward by half of an inch. I also went upward by half of an inch. I used my straight ruler to connect the darts to the waistline as shown. Then I also went ahead to use my straight ruler to connect from the half inch I went inward on the waistline to into the back part as shown. I also connected from that half inch just slightly above the hip line as shown. Then I went ahead to slash out this zipper bulge dart that I marked all the way to the side. I didn't extend from the side. Then I brought the pattern paper together like so. I'll go ahead and tape it down with my masking tape off camera. I went ahead to tape the slash part together off camera like I mentioned earlier. I also went ahead to cut out the second vertical dart that went from the hip line all the way to the top as shown. I went ahead to cut out the back pattern. I start cutting from the hip line because I'm going to mark out the remaining part of the dress on my fabric. So I went ahead to cut it out as shown. The next thing to do is to place my pattern paper on my fabric and cut out my pieces. For my back pattern, I pinned it to the fabric. I folded my fabric into two right sides facing each other. Now, if you could remember when I was cutting out the darts, I went into the back, but not all the way to the top, and also some inches upward from the hip line. So from the midpoint of my fabric, I marked out 2 inches, like so. I marked out 2 inches all the way to the down part of the dress. Now that line gives me a guide on where I'm going to place the center back. You can see, and I pinned it from that center back, just slightly from where I didn't cut it. I don't know that you understand. So I also went outward by 1.3 inches for my zipper allowance. To get the full length of the back pattern, I brought back my front piece and measured from my hip to the full dress length, and whatsoever I have there, which was 14.6 inches, I placed it from the hip line, and then I marked 14.6 inches downward. Hence, I didn't draft this pattern paper all the way to the full dress length. So I marked the line across. I measured out the dart I slashed out as my zipper bulge, and then what I had was 0.7. From my hip line there, I marked 14.6, and then from that 14.6, I came down by 0.6 inches, which is the zipper bulge. I connected a slant line to the side as shown. So I also marked out my 1.3 inches for my hemming allowance all the way to the other side, and then I drew a straight line. From the 2 inches, I went inward at the center back of the dress. That's the starting line. I measured my hip line to the other side, and I connected it all the way to the down part of the dress. For the side seam of the dress, I marked 1.5 inches as stitching allowance on the waistline and the hip line, and I connected the lines all the way to the down part of the dress. I also went ahead to cut the dress out. I didn't cut out exactly at the shoulder. I left out half-inch stitching allowance at the shoulder. I folded my fabric into two right sides facing each other, and I pinned my front pattern pieces on top of the fabric. So there is a joining at the underbust area if you look at the style inspiration. So I also went ahead to add half inch stitching allowance around the sides that I'm supposed to join on that underbust part as well. So I also went ahead to add my seam allowance of 1.5 inches on the chest line, the waistline, the hip line down to the dress length. I connected the lines as shown. So I also added my 1.5 or 1.3 inches hemming allowance at the down part. I went ahead to cut these front pieces out. That is the top part of the front and the sides. In fact, I went ahead to cut out all the pieces. I went ahead to cut out my keyhole open neckline. So when I was doing this, I didn't cut it exactly at that mark line. I cut away from it so I can have little allowance to stitch it, and I don't want it to be too open. For the back part, I used my tracing wheel to trace out the darts and so it can be visible on my fabric, and then I'll use my chalk to mark it out because I'll be later slashing out the darts. After cutting out all my pieces, I went ahead to iron ST on the wrong side of the fabric. I did this for all the pieces I cut for the front and back. I do this because I love the structure it gives to my dress. Well, next time when I'm doing this, I'll prefer using the cotton ST instead of this one. To join the pieces together, that's the side bustier to the front piece. I'll just place the right sides facing each other. From the underbust, I'll stitch by half of an inch to the other side of the armhole, and I'll also repeat the same process. Place it right sides facing each other, stitch it by half of an inch to the other armhole. I went ahead to cut out a facing for this keyhole neckline, which measures 4.5 inches and 5.5 inches. So I'll just place this keyhole on top of it like so. I'll go ahead to pin it down on both sides like so. Then after pinning, I flipped it to the wrong side. So after flipping it, I'll go ahead and take it to my stitching machine and stitch it by barely cut off an inch on all the sides. For the loops around the dart area, I cut out this very long piece of fabric which measures 1.5 inches wide, and then I'll go ahead and fold these loops on both sides just like half of an inch as shown. I'll go ahead and fold it into two again. I'll stitch it all the way to the length of the loop. I went ahead to stitch the keyhole part with the facing offline, as you can see, and I stitched one side of the bustier to the center piece. So I'll go ahead and stitch the second part of the bustier. So I'll just go ahead and stitch it for you guys to see. After stitching the bustier parts, I went ahead to use my tailor's ham to iron this properly, and you can see that I stitched the keyhole neckline. I'll go ahead and cut it out around the neckline part. After cutting out the keyhole neckline open, I'll just flip the facing to the wrong side. I'll go ahead and press it really flat so it can come out nice. So I went ahead to stitch my straps off camera, and I cut out 3 inches long strap. I cut as much strap as I would need for the dart part. I went ahead to iron the keyhole neckline. I flipped the facing to the wrong side and I held it down with my hemming gum. I also went ahead to join the opening at the top part of the neckline there. I opened up the down center front piece, and from the top I came down by half of an inch, and then I marked 1.5 inches in between because that's going to be the spacing for the loops. So I counted it, which is about 8 for 8 loops. So I did the same thing for the other side as well. Taking one of my loops, I placed it just after the half inch that I came down from the top. I'll go ahead to my stitching machine to secure it down. I'll do the same thing on all the mark points and also for the other side as well. I went ahead to iron the keyhole neckline. I flipped the facing to the wrong side and I held it down with my hemming gum. I also went ahead to join the opening at the top part of the neckline there. I opened up the down center front piece, and from the top I came down by half of an inch, and then I marked 1.5 inches in between because that's going to be the spacing for the loops. So I counted it, which is about 8 for 8 loops. So I did the same thing for the other side as well. Taking one of my loops, I placed it just after the half inch that I came down from the top. I'll go ahead to my stitching machine to secure it down. I'll do the same thing on all the mark points and also for the other side as well. After stitching the loops to the two sides of the center front piece, this is what I have. So I have my two side front piece. So I'll just place one of it right sides facing each other as shown. Stitch it down by half of an inch all the way to the dress length. I'll flip the other one and do the same thing as well. After stitching the two side front piece to it by half of an inch, this is what I have. So this is the outcome of the down part of the dress. Taking my upper front piece bodice, I place it on the down part, right sides facing each other as shown. I'll go ahead and stitch it down by half of an inch. I join the top part to the down part of the front piece and I have a whole full front piece now. So I pinned the back of my dress to the side of my front dress and I slit the dart that I traced with my tracing wheel earlier. So if you notice, like I said, I pinned the sides of this dress on the front part, but I started pinning it from the waistline. I made sure it's aligned. Now there's a reason why I did this, which I'm going to explain. Now the reason is that I want these loops to align properly towards the other side of the dart at the back. So I just place my straight ruler from the first loop to this side to make a mark. I place my ruler on the second loop to also make a mark. Now the whole essence of this is just your for your loops to align. So when you're lacing it, you know that you're lacing the correct thing. So this is just basically what I was doing here. So you're going to repeat the same process for the other loop. Just place your ruler, mark it out on the other side of the back dart as shown. Now when you're sure that you've marked out your lines properly, aligning to each other, you're just going to take your loops, take it to your stitching machine and secure it down at those marked points. Then from that slashed part at the darts area, you're just going to place it right sides facing each other and stitch it down. And repeat the same process for the other loops. I also pinned the second piece of the back part on the other side of the front piece as I did to the other side, just to give me a guide. And I also slashed my dart at the opening. So please, if you are slashing this dart, make sure you're slashing it at the nipple to nipple line. So whatsoever I'll do for the other side, I'll repeat the same process on the other side as well. I'll do this and bring it back for you guys to see. Here's a sneak peek process of how I was stitching the loops on the other side of the back piece, that's the darts area. So this is how I was stitching the loops. I advise you stitch the loops before placing the other slashed parts on it and stitching it together. After stitching the loops, I place the other half part or the other slashed part of the back part on top of the loops, right sides facing each other, and I stitch it down by half of an inch. When you're stitching on top of those loops, please double stitch it so it won't rip off when you're trying to lace it. Now when you're stitching this dart towards the end, stitch it in a slant-like manner like how you normally stitch a dart. So I'm done stitching the loops on the two back sides. You can see what I was talking about. If you look at the loops on the front darts and the back darts, it's aligning, like they are matching each other. So you won't have problem when you're lacing it up. I did this for the other side as well. I also joined my shoulder by half of an inch off camera. I did it on the other side. I placed the two back piece facing each other, right side facing each other. I'll go ahead and stitch it down with a loose stitch by 1.3 inches for my zipper allowance that I marked earlier when cutting the dress. I also aligned the side part of the dress, that is the back piece on the front piece. I'll take it to my stitching machine and stitch it down by 1.5 inches seam allowance by the sides. I'll do it on the other side as well. I stitched the side of the dress with a 1.5 inches stitching allowance, and I also stitched the zipper part, so I'll later loosen it up and fix my zip. The next thing to do is to get the measurement for the mandarin collar. The Mandarin collar isn't going to get into the zipper allowance. It's going to stop exactly at that stitch there. So I aligned my shoulders together, and I went ahead to use my tape to measure from there to where the zipper allowance stopped, and what I have there is 3.5. And then from the front part of the dress, I measured all the way to the back part to where the zipper stopped, and what I had there was 7.6 inches, and I will take note of those measurements. I folded this lightweight paper stay into two, and then I went ahead to measure the measurement I got from the neck to where the zipper stopped, and it's 7.6 inches. Then from the other folded parts, I measured 3.5 inches and I marked there. That is for the back part of the collar. From the 3.5 inches, I went upward by 1.3 inches as the height of the collar. Then at the outer end of the length of the Mandarin collar, I went upward by 0.7 inches. I used my curve ruler to connect to the 3.5 inches I marked for the back length. The same 1.3 inches measurement I used at that point, I'll also mark 1.3 inches upward from that curved line all the way to the other side. That's going to be the height of the collar. I used my curve ruler to connect the points as shown. Then I went ahead to connect these 2 points with my straight ruler. I also went ahead to make a curve to this point as shown. Then I labeled this other part as the back part, and I also went ahead to cut it out. I slashed the collar into two from this back side as shown. I used the pattern of the collar that I drafted on my mid-weight paper stay, and I placed it on top of my fabric. I cut out 4 pieces. I ironed air stay on all the 4 pieces, but on one of each of the pieces I ironed the hard mid-weight stay. I gave half-inch stitching allowance. I went ahead to stitch it towards or on that half-inch stitching allowance on both of these as shown. So I'll also go ahead and stitch the ends later. After stitching it on the allowance, I went ahead to notch all the sides and I flipped it inside out, and I'll also take it to my ironing table and press it down very well. To work on the sleeve of my dress, I brought back my dress and measured round my armhole, starting from where the side zipper allowance started. So I measured round, and what I had was 17.5. I drew a vertical line on my pattern paper and also a horizontal line. From that horizontal line, I marked my sleeve length, which is 4.5 inches. From that vertical line, I marked outward, which is 9 inches. That's 17 divided by 2 as a round armhole. I used my straight ruler to connect the point to the vertical line. I remarked my round armhole measurement divided by 2, and then I also went ahead to use my free hand to make a curve to that point as shown. I went ahead to cut out the cap sleeve pattern. So if you want to make any cap sleeve pattern, this is just the right way to go about it. This middle part is going to be cut out on fold. Taking my fabric, I went ahead to fold the fabric into two and place the pattern on it on fold. Then I'll go ahead and cut it out and also cut out on the lining. After turning the collar inside out, I gave this a very good press. You can see what it looks like, and I top stitched it at that down part on both of the collar pieces. So I also went ahead to close the other side that I said I was going to close earlier. I also went ahead to cut out my sleeve pieces. I ironed air stay on both of the pieces. I cut out my lining as well. I opened up one of my sleeve piece, and then I placed the lining on top of it, right sides facing each other. I'll go ahead to stitch it by 1/4 inch at the hem part, and I'll repeat the same process for the other side as well, or for the other sleeve I mean. To fix the collar to the dress, I took one of the collar piece and placed it from that open part, and then I went ahead to place it all the way to where the zipper allowance stopped. I'll take it to my stitching machine and stitch it by just 1/4 inch, and I'll also repeat the same process on the other side as well. I went ahead to stitch the lining to the sleeve pattern, right sides facing each other by 1/4 inch. I also went ahead to notch it. Then I flipped it to the wrong side and gave this a very good press. So the next thing to do is to top stitch at this top part and trim the excess out. This is the point where I joined the collar on the dress. So I just placed one of the collar on it, right sides facing each other from the opened part. I went ahead to stitch it down by just 1/4 inch. After stitching this part, if you have your weaving machine, please go ahead and weave that part. So I flipped that allowance part downward. I went ahead to stitch in the ditch all the way to the other side. I'm done stitching and one side of my collar is ready. I'll repeat the same process for the other side. At this point, I went ahead to top stitch the top part of my sleeve so it can hold the two pieces together. And when I was done, I went ahead to use my scissors to trim out the excess at the top part. At this point, I went ahead to join my sleeve. I started joining it from the midpoint of my shoulder, right sides facing each other. I joined it all the way to the point where the seam allowance stitch stopped. So the sleeve isn't going to go into the allowance. I also stitched the other side of the collar, and this is how my dress looks like. Like I mentioned earlier, if you have a weaving machine, please go ahead and weave these rough edges. So our dress is almost ready. At the point where there is an opening, I went ahead to bring it closer and stitch it together. I also stitched the other sleeve as well. And I also went ahead to stitch my zip at the back part of the dress. For the other upper part, because this Mandarin collar didn't go into the zipper allowance, I will use my hook and eye to attach it to the dress. The last thing to do on this dress is to hem the dress at the base. So I'll just fold it inward by the 1 inch stitching allowance we gave when we're cutting this dress. I'll go ahead and stitch it down. So guys, I made an error on this dress when I was cutting it out that I want to share with you guys. When I was placing my pattern on my fabric, I placed the vertical part on the side that stretches the more. And crepe fabric has the side that stretches less and more. So I wasn't supposed to have done that. I would have placed it vertically from the side that stretches less. So hence the zipper bulge, even though I removed the zipper bulge at the zipper parts and also iron my mid-weight ST. So I went ahead to cut a very long strap of fabric to lace the sides of the dress. So please make sure this rope is very long. So I went ahead to fix my lacing on the sides. So we've come to the end of this tutorial. If you've watched this video to this extent, please don't just watch and leave. Leave a like and a comment below. I'll see you in my next tutorial.